to indicate the word mashkon means collateral, that there could be two bati migdosh, which can be taken as collateral. The famous Orach Chaim, we always mention that when Moshe Rabbeinu had supplicated Hashem, V'eschanel Hashem, to allow him to go into Eretz Yisrael, Hashem says, under no circumstance, you cannot go in. So one of the reasons the Orach Chaim Kodesh explains, we find that the Mishkan, which we'll discuss in a moment, is called Mishkan Shel Moshe. The Medrash tells us in terms of the originally when it speaks about the metals that were needed, Zov Kesef Nechoshes, the Medrash says, it's a Yalkut, that Zov ze Mishkan Shel Moshe. Zov is alluding to the Mishkan which was built by Moshe Rabbeinu, which was overseen by him, which is Chaviv HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kizov. It's beloved Hashem like gold. Kesef is Bayis Rishon. Kesef is alluding to the first Beis HaMikdash, which was built by Shlomo Melech, the wealth in the time of Shlomo Melech. He conquered the world, he ruled the world supreme. And it quotes a pasuk that silver was like stones found in the street. That was the level of wealth Klal Yisrael had at that time. Silver almost had no value. So silver alludes to what? The Bayis Rishon, which was built by Shlomo Melech. Nechoshes is Bayis Sheni, sheyechosim l'chamesh dvarim. There were 5 things that were lacking in the Bayis Sheni. Number, because the word nechushta means like from the bottom. It's deficient. It's referring to a Beis HaMikdash that was deficient. The Shechina wasn't there. The Aron was not there. There are many things that weren't there. As a result of that, that's referring to Bayis Sheni. But Mishkan Shel Moshe is Zov, and Chazal tell us, as we discussed in the moment in this week's parsha, that the Mishkan of Moshe Rabbeinu, everything he oversaw is eternal, was hidden away. The Krushim were hidden away, everything was hidden away. When eventually they built the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan was hidden away. Why? Because anything that Moshe Rabbeinu was involved in is eternal. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. So as a result of that, the Orach Chaim Kodesh explains that if Moshe Rabbeinu would have gone to Eretz Yisrael, he would have built the Beis HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash couldn't be destroyed. So the Beis HaMikdash can't be destroyed, and the Jews themselves have to be punished for their failings. As a result of that, he'd have to destroy Klal Yisrael. He wouldn't be able to take the Beis HaMikdash as collateral, because the collateral is only if you could take it. And what is taking the Beis HaMikdash from us? Destroying it. But if Moshe Rabbeinu would oversee the building of the Beis HaMikdash, he would build it. It couldn't be destroyed. And we find in regard to Tisha B'Av, the pasuk says that Hashem expended His wrath al eitzav avonim, on the wood and the stones of the Beis HaMikdash, rather than on us. That's the reason why we find that Tisha B'Av is called the Moed. As tragic as it was, it's the day of communal mourning. And all tragedy happens on that day. That's a Moed. Moed is it's like a Yom Tov. That's the reason why we don't say Tachnun on Tisha B'Av. Because rather than us being destroyed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Beis HaMikdash as a mashkon, as collateral, rather than taking us. So we find in this pasuk, the destruction of the Bayis Rishon Bayis Sheni is alluded here by mentioning the word Mishkan twice, that there were 2 collaterals which Hashem had taken, the Bayis Rishon and the Bayis Sheni. Okay? That's Mishkan. We're holding by Rashi, Mishkan Ha'idus. It's referred to as Mishkan of Testament. What is it, a testament? Eidus li Yisrael, shevit lem HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Masa Egel. It's a testament to Klal Yisrael that Hashem was viter al Masa Egel, that He overlooked, or if He gave the Masa Egel, what's the proof? The proof is that Hashem allowed His presence to dwell in our midst. That's the Eidus. The Eidus is that the Shechina dwells in our midst. Therefore, it's the Mishkan Eidus. It's a testament to us, the Yisrael Shavita, Lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Ais Egel. Now, the Umas Olam, the nation of the world, say that because we did the Egel, we were disenfranchised. And therefore, we're no longer the chosen nation. The Mishkan is a confirmation that it's not correct what they said, because he told us to build the Mishkan. That's its Mishkan Eidus. Now we find in Vayikro to speak about the three species, domesticated species, which qualify as a korban. Which are the three species which qualify as a korban? Shor, Kesev, Eis. Shor is the ox, Kesev is the sheep, the Eis is the goat. These are the three species which qualify as a korban. So the Medrash asks, why does the Torah mention the ox as the first of the species? So you would say, because it's the largest of the three species. The ox, the sheep, and the goat. The ox is the largest. So Nietzsche says, no. The reason why it's mentioned, the shor is mentioned first, because it's alluding to the Chet Egel. You would think that the Jews are fully culpable for the Chet Egel, and it's unforgivable. And as a result of that, we were not reinstated. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, proof that you were not fulfillable, because the first and the primary species which I choose that you should bring a korban is the shor, is the ox. And the ox is the egel, same species as the calf. And it explains what a moshel. What's the moshel? What an allegory. The king was traveling, and word went out that one of his closest courtiers committed adultery with his wife. The king came back. He immediately launched an investigation, and there were murmurings throughout the kingdom that this person committed adultery with the queen. He did his research, and he found out the whole thing was false, wasn't true. But meantime, everybody believes that that's what happened. So how does the king put this to rest and confirm that this is false? He makes a banquet, invites all the heads of state to the banquet. And the king sits, of course, on the dais. Who sits next to the king? This courtier who was suspected committed adultery, he sits right next to the king. So people say, evidently, what they said is false, because if it's true that he committed adultery, even though he pardoned him, he wouldn't have him sit right next to him to be so-called the equivalent of the guest of honor. So that he chose to sit him next to him is an indication, a confirmation that whatever was said was false. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, the world says we were disenfranchised, that we're at fault for Chet Egel. There was liability, and therefore it's unforgivable. Hashem says when it comes to atonement, the first and the choices of the species is the shor, is the ox, to confirm, to indicate that we are not the ones who are fully culpable. Why? Because we find by the Chet Egel that it says, Eila Elohecha Yisrael. The Erev Rav are the ones who actually encouraged us and precipitated this. This is your God, Israel. If the Jews themselves actually brought this about, it should say, Elo Eloheinu Yisrael. What's Elo Elohecha Yisrael? Evidently, it's clear the Jews are not the ones who encouraged this, but rather it was the Erev Rav. Therefore, we are not held accountable at a level that it's unforgivable. Therefore, the first species that Hashem chooses to be brought as the korban is the ox, which is the same species as the egel. It's Mishkan or Eidus. It's Eidus l'Yisrael, Shevida HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lehem al Chet Egel, Shehish Shechina Beineim. He allowed the Shechina to dwell in their midst. So it's for us to know. It's for us to know. Very often, people, they delude themselves. They believe it's something, and there is no relationship. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, I don't want you to think for a moment and that we're playing a game here. This is the real thing. The relationship is there because my Shekhinah dwells in your midst. I once said, there's the famous Medrash which Rashi quotes right at the beginning of Bereshis, that Rabbi Yitzchak asks a question: why does the Torah begin with the story of creation? Why doesn't it begin with the first mitzvah, which is Achodesh Zel Bochem Rosh Chadoshim? The mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, which is when we left Egypt, right before we left Egypt, the first mitzvah was given to us, was the sanctification of the new moon. And the Maral explains, since the Torah is a book of halacha, how the Jew has to live his life, why does it begin with creation, the whole background, the history of how the world came about? So he explains, the Maral explains, because we have to have the background. We have to know that where it all began. But that's the question. It's answers, because when the nations of the world will accuse us of being interlopers, Hashem, we say to them, we say to the world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this world. He gave it, he took it. He took it back. As is indicated, the story with the Great Flood, the Darafloga, all the various events that took place. He gave it, took it back. Identically, he gave it to the 7 tribes of Canaan, the 7 nations of Canaan. He took it back and he gave it to us. So we're not interlopers, because he's the creator. He dictates who should be, who should not be. So it's Eidus L'Yisrael, it's a testament for us to understand that we should be able to respond to the nations of the world. So again, you go tell this to the Arab. We have a claim to Eretz Yisrael. Tell it to the communist. We have a claim. Tell it to anybody. They said it's your book. We have a different book. We have a different narrative. Your narrative is not our narrative. The answer is it's irrelevant what your narrative is. It's for us to know that we shouldn't live with a guilt conscience that we have no right to be here. We have a right to be here. Why do we have a right to be here? Because since HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the creator, and we understand he has the ability to give and take, he chose to give it to us, and therefore it's ours. Therefore, with all the murmurings in the world, it's totally irrelevant to us. That the world says that we're disenfranchised due to the Chet Egel, it's irrelevant. That the Shekhinah dwells in our midst, that's a confirmation that what? That the Shekhinah is with us, that we were forgiven for the Chet Egel. That the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, is not an indication that we were disenfranchised, and the only way we could be reinstated is accept the belief of Christianity, Chas v'Sholom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us, I will never leave you. Despite the fact that the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, we retain that status of the chosen people. So this Eidus is for us, it's not for the world. What the world believes and thinks, it's irrelevant. It's what we have to believe. And we have to believe and understand what the nature of the relationship is. Moshe Rabbeinu says it's Eretz Zovis Kol V'Vosh. There's nothing better than Canaan, land, flows milk, honey, so on and so forth. We have 12 spies, 10 come back with negative reports, 2 come back with very positive reports. Kolev in Yeshua, the people leave the 10. Now the question is, after all, Hashem says, after all you've seen, how do you believe the 10? Hashem says, I've already proven to them who I am and what I am. How did they suspect that I'm taking them to a location where they're going to be destroyed? So the Seforno said, when Moshe Rabbeinu originally presented them with the 4 expressions of Gula, it's lo shomu Moshe mikoytzer ruach me'avod kosher. They did not listen to Moshe Rabbeinu because they were short-winded and the tremendous workload they had, that they had to meet the quotas. So the Sephar over there says, if you look over there, says, in terms of what they saw, the 10 plagues, although it was before the last of the 10, and after what they understood, they should have embraced this. But yet, there was a degree of doubt, because if they would have internalized fully what was going on, they would have embraced what Moshe Rabbeinu said, despite the hard work. And he says, because they didn't believe then, which they should have, and they failed, therefore, when it came to the Meraglim, they went back to that level of lack of belief, and therefore they believed the 10 over the 2. And therefore, already was destined that they weren't going to go in. It was their children who were going to go in, not them. That's the Sephar over there. That was the Chet Meraglim. That was a lack of belief, not trusting Hashem. We studied in the past Nefesh HaChaim. Nefesh HaChaim is semi-Kabbalistic work, and the Ramchal speaks at length about this, but Nefesh HaChaim explains every human being is made up of 3 parts: the neshama, the ruach, and the nefesh. Neshama is the soul. The soul is totally spiritual. Ruach is the spirit. And then there's the nefesh. Every living species has a nefesh. It means a life source. So Chaim Volozhin explains the nefesh is the physical functioning of every living species. And based on the nefesh, it functions in its own capacity based on the physical DNA, the DNA of that species, whether it's a lion, whether it's a snake, whatever it is, each one has its own type of nefesh, and the nefesh causes to manifest itself in form, in color, in ability. That's based on nefesh. The human being, besides having a nefesh, has a ruach, has a spirit, and has a soul. Even the non-Jew has a soul, has a neshama. The reason why a person could speak is because he has a ruach. And he goes to explain, when you speak, wind comes out of our mouth. We speak. But that has this, the ruach links the neshama to the nefesh. When the neshama leaves the person, there's no ruach, the only thing that's left is nefesh. Even when a person dies, there's Gemara in Shabbos, there's some level of nefesh that remains behind with the body, which we don't sense because the person's not alive. And therefore, when the body decomposes, there is a degree of pain. We just had, the Gemara says in Brochus that Rima libsara mes is kemachat libsara chayim. That when the maggot eats the body, it's the equivalent of putting a needle into living flesh. So there is an experience of pain. That experience of pain is because there's some degree of nefesh, which is part of the original person, and that's part of the suffering, it's part of the atonement. That's part of the atonement process. That's the Gemara. So now, the Rav Chaim Volozhin explains, this is a commentary on Pirkei Avos. It says, Al Shloshim Dvarim Ha'omed, Ala Torah Avoda Al Gemilas Chasodim. The world stands on three principles. Study of Torah, Avoda is the Korbanos, or Tefillah, and Gemilas Chesed. Gemilas Chasodim, acts of loving kindness. So he explains that Gemilas Chesed corresponds to the Nefesh. Why? There's an expression, there's a word, it's called koach hatinur, the ability for movement, to move. That a human being moves, or any living species moves, there's movement. When you do milas chesed, what are you doing? You're reaching out to do chesed with a third party. That's gemilas chesed. So nefesh corresponds to gemilas chesed. Avoda is the mind. That's the thought process. That's the intellect. The ability to understand, to make choices within a certain realm, which has to do with spirituality, which is the ultimate. And he says, we find that a Kohen, when he officiates, if he has a thought which is not an appropriate thought, the korban becomes people. Although the physical act is perfect, but if his mind was to sprinkle the blood not in its proper time, proper place, would not eat it, the korban is invalidated immediately. That's machshava. So the machshava is neshama. And he says, Torah is what? That's ruach. Because as we quoted the Gemara many times in Eruvin, that one studies Torah, you have to verbalize, you have to articulate the words. Chayvi l'motzayim. You're supposed to, that's articulation. So dibur corresponds to ruach. And that's firstly. So he says in Ruach Chaim, his commentary on Pirkei Avos, he says, Avram Avinu, the founding father of the Jewish people, he is the nefesh of Klal Yisrael. He was the totality of the nefesh of Klal Yisrael. He's the founding father. Because what was his characteristic? What was his attribute? Gemilas Chasodim. Gemilas Chesed nefesh, that's koach hapnu. He went out, espoused monotheism, but it was through what vehicle did he use? Chesed, hospitality. Yitzchak is what? Is neshama. He's the neshama of Klal Yisrael. He corresponds to the neshama of Klal Yisrael. The communal neshama. Because we find Yitzchak was the Ola Tmima. He was the unblemished offering that was brought by Avram Avinu. So even he had to have a pure thought. And Yaakov Avinu is the Torah, is the Ruach of Klal Yisrael. Yaakov Ishtam Yeshiva Holy. I'm quoting Rav Chaim Volozhin. He is the Ruach, the spirit of Klal Yisrael. He's the founding father of the spirit. And from that, we emanate Neshama, which is Yitzchak, Ruach, which is Yaakov, and Nefesh, which is Avraham Avinu. That's so. I'll show you the Torah about the Gilstasod. Now, so what I said that if you want to evaluate who Moshe is, who is Moshe? Moshe is the equivalent of the Neshama of Klal Yisrael. He was the holiest human being ever lived. He was Shakol Keneged Yisrael. His Neshama was the equivalent of the totality of Klal Yisrael. He's the Neshama. Okay? Now, the Mishkan that Moshe Rabbeinu oversaw corresponds to the Neshama of Klal Yisrael. That's to establish the Neshama, to perfect it. Once Moshe Rabbeinu is not there, there's nobody the equivalent of that. That Mishkan is hidden away. Neshama is untouchable. Has nothing to do with the physical realm. Even Ruach has relevance to the physical realm, because that's the link between the Neshama and the Nefesh. Now, what was the objective of the Bayis Rishon? The objective of Bayis Rishon was to perfect the Ruach of Klal Yisrael. Why was the Beis Hamikdash destroyed? You know why? Al-Ozamas Torosi. The Navi Yirmiyah says, because they abandoned my Torah. Because they abandoned my Torah, therefore the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. And that led to the three cardinal sins. So what was the objective of Bayis Rishon? To perfect the Ruach of Klal Yisrael. Because they failed, and they did not utilize it as it was meant to be utilized, the relationship to perfect the Ruach. You know something? I'm taking it back. And therefore was destroyed after 410 years. Now, by Sheni, now we have to perfect the Nefesh of Klal Yisrael. Nefesh is the least of the three. It's already deficient. It's the least. What is it meant to perfect? The Nefesh. What's Nefesh? That's Gemilas Chesed. That's Beinom L'Chavero. Why was Bayis Sheni destroyed? Because there was unwarranted hate. They failed on the human level, on the relationships, on the Nefesh level, that they weren't fully committed to develop and address the potential of Nefesh. Therefore, was destroyed. So the Mishkan corresponds to the Neshama of Klal Yisrael. That's what it was meant to perfect, to utilize that relationship. That was the Mishkan. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. Then you have Bayis Rishon perfect the Ruach, which was Torah, and they failed. It was taken. Bayis Sheni was meant to perfect the Nefesh, which is Chesed, and we failed with Sinas Chinam. And as the Chofetz Chaim cites through Shalmi, that the reason why the Beis Hamikdash still hasn't been rebuilt, because we still haven't corrected the Sinas Chinam, which we're still suffering from. Comes out. It says that the beams, which were vertical beams, are omdim. They stood. So the Gemara explains, she'omdim l'olam lomim, meaning they're eternal. It never fell. They never fell into the hands of the enemy. Al hepech mashakor lemigdosh Shlomo the Caleb, which was not the case by the destruction of the first base of Migdosh, which was built by Shlomo. Kivur b'chur b'Bayis Rishon aydei buzaradan shel nizka shem dover minyonei hamishkan Moshe Rabbeinu olav Shalom. None of the vessels that were part of Moshe Rabbeinu's Mishkan actually fell in the hands when it was destroyed into the hands of the Babylonians. Mishkan Ha'idus, Siper Mailos Mishkan. It's the Mishkan of the Testament. It speaks about the distinction of this Mishkan. And because it was Mishnah, therefore it was meant to be eternal, never to fall into the hands of the enemies. Rishon, firstly, Mishkan Ha'idus. He's learning. Firstly, there was the tablets of testament that were chosen to be the Jewish people. Asher poket al pi Moshe, which came through Moshe Rabbeinu, the 10 Commandments. Gimel, yeah. Beis, Asher pukat. Shahoiso avodas alvim biad Yisomer. The avodas alvim was overseen by Yisomer, who was the surviving son of Aaron. Ki omnom Mishmeres kol chilkei mishkan b'yamisom hoiso. Dalid uBetzal ben Uri ben Chul mat Yehuda also. Betzalel, who was that Jew who was inspired and endowed with divine understanding, he oversaw the building of the Mishkan. So Roshi Umli Mlachsa Mishan V'Kelev Miuchosim V'Tzadikim Shebedor. The ones who oversaw and were involved had the most advanced pedigree of the generation. And that's why the Shekhinah dwelt in terms of their handiwork, because they were most special in the levels of distinction with Hashem. Therefore, their handiwork had a capacity that the Shekhinah should dwell in it. He actually enlisted foreign workers to help build the Beis Hamikdash. They came from Tyre. Even though the Shekhinah dwelt, it was sufficient with the Shekhinah, but factually it was deficient. And Oakland was destroyed. The Shekhinah was not by Sheni, meaning on a permanent level. What was lacking in the second base? The luchos were not there because the luchos were in the Oron. Besides, not the Oron. Lo Pugad came out de Koresh. It was actually, we were given permission by Koresh, that was the son of Achashverosh. Lohoyu Shem b'nei Levi. The Levi did not officiate to oversee it. K'mo shehoyu heid Ezra va'avino ba'om l'kohanim b'nei Levi l'motzosi shom min askin b'mismiyanu hoyet Sidonim v'tzurim. The ones who built it were all goyim. They weren't Jews. Kivur b'sefer Ezra. Therefore, as a result of that, we say Masi de Kodole, Masi de Kodneu. After we say Noam, we say Masi de Kodneu, Masi de Kodneu. We ask Hashem that our handiwork should have the capacity that Hashem should have an interest in being associated with it. You could be a person could have one of a kind of ability, intellect, endowed with many gifts, and you do things. You teach Torah, but if you're not the right person disseminating it, the impact, the effect on others is not going to be the same effect. Even when you teach and you influence, you have to be that special person that it should make a difference in people's lives. A person who writes a Sefer Torah, people make a big mistake. The sandik by a bris is such an important honor, not so much from the one who is given the honor, for the child who's held by that special person. Because since when the child is circumcised, he's entering into the covenant of Avraham Avinu, and that's when he starts beginning his destiny of spirituality. The one who holds him on his lap when that takes place will make a difference in the destiny of that child, who the tzaddik was. And therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, when Rav Chaim Kanievsky was alive, many people would ask him to be the tzaddik. Rav Steinman's in front of her. They were alive. They wanted him. Rabbi Yosef, they wanted he should be the tzaddik. Rav Shach, because when these people held that child, that made a difference. It gave the child a greater potential. Of course, everything is free choice, but in terms of potential, it avails the potential for the child to a greater degree. And people, they give the tzaddik, I'll honor this one, I'll honor that one. They miss the boat. Rather than think the one you're honoring, you think about who's going to be the beneficiary of that honor, the child. That's a Masi de Kono, Masi de Koneu. It depends who the artisans are. If the tzaddikim, it's a different reality. They can be gifted forever with unlimited ability, but if they're not the right type of person, the Shekhinah doesn't have much relevance to that level of handiwork. I once had a question. Somebody asked me many years ago. I'm not going to mention names. He lived in Englewood, and he asked me whether his wife's grandmother, or maybe his mother was the grandmother of the child. Could she be the sandik? Hear this? Could his mother be the sandik of the child at the bris? So I told him, no, never. Special as a woman's not the sandik. A man has a different level of representation. Therefore, she doesn't qualify.
Rabbi,
Okay.
quick question, Rabbi.
Talel ben Uri ben Chur. Lamati Yehuda. Oseis Kol Hashetzivas Hashem. Hashem is Moshe. He's the one who did all that Hashem had commanded Moshe. Rashi. Ubitzala ben Uri. Oseis Kol Hashetziva Hashem is Moshe. Hashetziva also Moshe. En Ksiv. It doesn't say Hashetziva also. Ela Kol Hashetziva Hashem es Moshe. Afil Dvorim Shel Omelo Rabo. Even things which his Rebbe did not tell him, he understood. He came upon certain things. There were certain things Moshe told him, which is difficult to understand. He quotes the Gemara, it's Gemara Brochus. Moshe originally had told them to first make the vessels and then to make the Mishkan. Make the location where he's going to put them. So B'tzal says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Minok Olam Lasus Tchila Bayis V'Akach Mesim Kelim B'Tocho. First you build the structure, and then you put the items into that structure, the vessels. Omalo Kach Shemat B'Yakodesh Baruch Hu. And B'tzal says, this is my understanding. Omalo Moshe B'Tzel Kelo Yisa. Evidently, clearly in God's shadow. Ki B'Vadei Kach Tzivo L'Yakodesh Baruch Hu. He says, that's definitely what you said. You first built the Mishkan, then you built the Kelim. You oversaw the development of the Kelim, of the vessels. You don't have to stop. I mean, the whole different way. Moshe Rabbeinu made a mistake. I mean, that's the difficulty. I mean, Moshe told him first make the vessels and then build the outer structure. Saul says, but it seems to be what Hashem says, no, first you build the outer structure, then you make the vessels. And when he told me that, Moshe says, you're right what you said. You first should do, as you say, the order is sequential, is what you're saying. That's what Hashem said. Clear you B'Tzel kill. So where did Moshe go wrong? And did Moshe go wrong? We've mentioned, Rameir Simcha discusses this, that before the Chet Egel, where was the Shekhinah meant to dwell? Directly in our midst. So really, the outer structure was really not relevant to the Kelim. We were the Mishkan. As a result of the Chet Egel, where there was an arm's length relationship afterwards. Mostly Migdash or Shechati B'Tocham, that the medium for the Shekhinah is the Migdash to have a relationship. Now you have to have the outer structure. And then you bring the Kelim in. Okay, we'll continue this tomorrow.